Kia ora, and welcome to episode 8 in this series of short teaching videos on how we respond biblically to COVID-19. As I'm filming today, it's Wednesday the 22nd of April, and New Zealand has been in lockdown for 4 weeks today. The government just announced a couple of days ago that we're going to stay at what we're calling level 4 until next Monday, and then we're going to drop down to level 3, which is going to last at least 2 more weeks. And level 3, some more people can go back to work, a few students can head to school, but for most of us, we're staying in our bubble, we're staying locked down. So it's going to be at least 7 weeks. And I've just felt myself in the last couple of days feeling a little bit more agitated and a bit more cabin fever. And so I decided that I want to do a teaching video on something that I desperately need to hear and be reminded of. And that's the call time and time again in the Bible to wait patiently. Wait patiently, to endure, to trust in God, to hang in there, and to wait well. And I want to look at this idea for a few minutes with you from a beautiful couple of verses from the book of James in the New Testament. James is one of the earliest letters in the Bible. And James 5, 7 and 8 reads like this. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. There are 3 things I want to highlight from this beautiful couple of verses here. The first thing is what James calls us to do, what he commands us to do. And he does it twice, doesn't he? Be patient. He says it at the beginning of verse 7, then said it again in verse 8, almost underlined it again and added the second command to stand firm. But we need to hear this call to be patient, because people generally have never been particularly good at patience, but I think in our modern world we're getting worse at it. I spoke on patience a little while ago at a church here in New Zealand, and I told them the story of an article that appeared a few years ago in the Boston Globe newspaper in the US. It was reporting on a study that had been done on the waiting times and the patience of people. And this particular study, it focused on how long people had to wait for a document to be downloaded onto their computer or their phone. What the study found was that after waiting for 5 seconds, 25% of the people had stopped the download. When they pushed it out to 10 seconds, 50% had already given up. Half the people in the study, in other words, could not wait for 10 seconds for a download to be completed before they had given up and walked away. And it's not a surprise really, is it? We live in a society almost wherever you are in the world now, where so often we can get things so quickly and so instantaneously that our willingness to wait, to be patient, is almost getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're in a 10-second society, many of us. And so this call to be patient here that James writes, to wait patiently, is incredibly difficult. Whether that's to wait patiently for people, for one another, or to be waiting patiently in circumstances that are really hard and really tough. And I think in James 5, he's really, both of those things come together. But James says this twice, be patient, wait patiently. The second thing I want to highlight then is the why. And again, twice he says, after both commands to be patient, he gives the same reason why. Because the Lord's coming is near. He's talking about the return of Jesus. Jesus has obviously come to this world once. We celebrate every Christmas his birth. He then lived a perfect life. He died on the cross and rose again, that we've just celebrated at Easter. And he's now ascended to heaven. But Jesus, the New Testament tells us again and again, is going to come back. And he's going to set up his kingdom on earth. He's going to bring in the new heavens and the new earth. And for those of us who've put our faith and trust in him, we are going to live with him forever in a redeemed and a beautiful new creation. It's an incredible promise. And the idea that the New Testament teaches again and again is that Jesus could return at any time. And that's the reason that James gives for waiting. Now, he's writing to people who are being oppressed in the context of James 5 by wealthy people who are exploiting them. But what James says to these poor people who are being exploited, being ripped off, is be patient because Jesus is coming back. And when Jesus returns, justice is going to be rolled out. The evil that people have done is going to be put back on them. He's going to establish his righteous kingdom. The new creation, the new heavens and the new earth are going to be brought in, and there's going to be no more oppression, no more hardship. You realize there's going to be no more coronaviruses ever in the new heavens and the new earth. And so James says, be patient. Why? Because Jesus is coming back. And while right now it may feel really hard, and it's been 4 weeks in New Zealand, and I don't know how long for wherever you are if you're elsewhere in the world, what he's saying is, in light of forever, the fact that Jesus is coming back and that could happen at any moment makes a massive difference to us being able to wait patiently and endure tough times. I love what UK pastor Sam Aubrey writes on this. He says, knowing the end with confidence makes it possible to bear something otherwise virtually unendurable. James readers can be patient because Jesus will return and their hardship will come to an end. One of my professors at seminary talked about the coming of Jesus being like this massive water balloon hanging over you that could burst in at any moment, and that sense that you have hunched shoulders in anticipation. That's how the early church understood the return of Jesus. It could happen. He could burst back into our world at any time. So in light of that, James says, be patient, wait patiently. The third thing that I want to highlight is what, why, and then how. How are we to be patient? We're to be like the farmer who is waiting for the rains. This is the way he worded it back in verse 7, if you remember. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. This would have been a really helpful and practical example, a word picture for James's readers. Many of them would have been farmers or would have known farmers really well. And the idea is that a farmer preps the land and sows the seed and weeds the ground and does everything the farmer can do. But at the end of the day, the farmer then has to wait for the crop. He has to wait for the rain. And certain things are completely out of the farmer's control. They just have to wait patiently. It's a really helpful idea and an example of what it looks like to be patient. It's a really practical example, but it's also richly and deeply theological. See, this reference here at the end to the autumn and spring rains comes from the Old Testament. It's a reference in the land of Israel to rainfall that happens predominantly twice a year, in the autumn and spring, often sometimes translated the early and latter rain. So it would happen in the autumn northern hemisphere, which was around September, October, and then the spring rains would come around March, April. And that is what watered the land. But in the Old Testament, this phrase is used, the autumn and spring rains, or the early and latter rains, 5 or 6 times. But in each passage it's talked about, the context is a discussion of the faithfulness of God. That God will look after his people and that the farmers of Israel can trust God because he is faithful to them. And James is writing to Jewish Christians in this letter, steeped in the Old Testament. So he's not just giving them a practical example of farmers who are willing to wait for the rain. He's also giving them something that is deeply theological from the Old Testament that his readers would have understood as a reference and a reminder to them. They can wait patiently because God is a good and faithful God. Wait patiently, James says. And we need to hear this, don't we? In a lockdown and in a changing world, when wherever you are in the world watching this, it's just really different. And it's so easy to get annoyed and impatient and wanting things to change. And James comes to us and says, just wait. Jesus is coming again. Life is going to be set right. God is a faithful God, so let's wait patiently on Him. Recently, I've read a wonderful book on the lament Psalms called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy. I quoted it in one of the earlier videos. And here's what the author Mark Vrokop talks about waiting. He says, why is waiting so difficult? Because it feels as if we're not doing anything. Exactly. And he says, that's the point. You're not doing anything, but God is. He goes on, however, waiting is one of the greatest applications of the Christian faith. You're putting your trust in God. You're placing your hope in Him. And you're expressing your confidence that He is in control. And I hope that's a helpful reminder to you today. God is in control. He is a faithful God. Jesus will return. And so in light of that, we can and we need to wait patiently. I hope that's an encouragement to you today, to be patient as we sit through this pandemic. Wait patiently. God bless.